Hello and welcome again once more to ACAD Asia Webinar Wednesdays. I'm Roy Platon, co-founder and chief community officer for ACAD Asia. We are Singapore-based, impact-driven edtech business, and we are here to empower educators everywhere. And we're so glad to have all of you, our dear friends from the global community of ACAD Asia. It's wonderful to have you all join us again. It's been a while. I know, especially from our friends from Catholic countries and the Philippines, especially that we had just come off our break to celebrate, our dearly departed, November 1, November 2. We usually go to the cemeteries to give our respects to those who have gone ahead before us. And of course, from the Halloween parties, October 31, some of you have probably been partying. I hope not too hard and hopefully you've rested well. So to all our friends, we have friends watching from Cebu. We also have friends joining us from Cambodia. Hello, Xochitnim. Hello from Cambodia. We have friends from Bulacan in the Philippines. Maasin, Iloilo, Philippines. Hello, everybody. Misamis Oriental. Hello, everyone. Cavite. You know, Cavite, we just had quite a storm at Nalge, international name Nalge. Come over and really pour a lot of rain. So I hope you guys are staying nice and dry also as well. Welcome, Miss May Versosa. Hello. Also our friends from North Cotabato, Libungan. Hello, everybody. So it's great to see all of you. Today for Webinar Wednesday, we have an exciting program to share with all of you. Really nice to see all of you once again. Before I kind of move on to the program proper, I just want to have a happy announcement that ACAD Asia has again made it for 2 years straight in a row for the Holland IQ list of top 50 edtech startups in Southeast Asia. So thank you so much, dear teachers. If it wasn't for you, all our friends in the community, we would not have made the top 50 list again for a second year in a row. Holland IQ is a prominent research firm that monitors the edtech landscape in Southeast Asia and other regions, and we have made it to the top 50. So thank you so much, everybody, for supporting ACAD Asia and being part of the community. We would have been there without all of you. So today, we have an interesting topic for Webinar Wednesday. And the title of our program today covers basically deeper learning through project-based learning. Okay, so for the entire month of November, our main topic is about project-based learning. So we'll have several speakers and panelists join us every week, once a week, to share with us their thoughts and application of project-based learning in their teaching practice, in their curriculum, and the do's and don'ts and how they've been doing so far. Another piece of good news I want to share with everybody is also for this month of November, for the Philippines, we have officially we are officially awarding CPD points to all our courses for this month of November. Okay, so this week, Webinar Wednesday. Next week, we'll have Technology Tuesday. And then the week after that, we have ACAD Asia Thursday, Teacher Spaces Thursdays, ACAD Asia Teacher Spaces on a Thursday. So all those events will have CPD points duly accredited and awarded. For this whole month, you'll be earning up to 3 CPD points if you attend all of the activities and complete all the accompanying courses with attending our live sessions as well. Okay, so you get up to 3 CPD points for all 3 events. So please stay tuned. Towards the end, I'll show you how. Make sure you watch through the entire session today, and then I'll give instructions on how to kind of complete the course and earn your CPD points for this session, for next week, and the week after. For the month of November, 3 CPD points for PRC in the Philippines. So very happy to announce that as well. So when we talk about project-based learning, which is our topic for this session this week, there's a lot of things regarding, learning activities, long-term interdisciplinary and student-centered activities, and how it's different from the traditional classroom. I'd like to bring in our master's degree keynote introductory speaker for opening remarks. I'd like to bring in Jake Aragon to give some opening remarks. What is this project-based learning? What are we talking about here when we discuss project-based learning? Hi, Jake.
Hi, Roy. Good evening to you and to all our teachers who are joining us tonight. Welcome to the largest community, online community of educators from around the world. And what a topic, Roy, to talk about tonight. Project-based learning. It's very close to my heart because when I was a principal, when I established a senior high school in 2016, I saw the benefits of project based learning. And instead of administering paper and pen exams at the time, I worked with the teachers, the parents, and the students and said, let's do PBL. It just worked wonders for everyone. And we're very excited to learn more about it tonight as our guest speakers will share wonderful insights and experiences about PBL.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, so I'm really interested, Jake, about the topic actually today. So thank you for giving those introductions. Maybe a little later, I can invite you to come back during the Q&A so that you can share some of your insights, especially from a Philippine context. So thank you very much, Jake, for those opening remarks on how effective PBL was for you. All right, so
You're
see you in
welcome,
a bit,
Roy.
Jake.
Yeah,
See
see you
you
later.
later. So now I'd like to introduce our guest speakers. So interestingly enough, we have a couple from our friends. They're both based in Indonesia. And for our first speaker, I'm very happy to introduce him. I'll start with our gentleman. He's based out of Bali at the moment. Um, so he actually originally uh, is based out of Canada, but he moved to different locations and has been working in the education field since 2003. Uh, However, his previous career and education in marine biology, so he's a marine biologist, I guess, by training, he never actually left it too far behind as he developed experiential learning programs in the water and on land, which exposes learners of all ages to nature in general. In 2012, he worked with Green School Bali on developing experiential and project-based learning across the entire school there. And through the programs he designed, he's taken students across the Indonesian archipelago to learn about cultures, survive in the wild, create impact-driven projects. 2019, he moved to Budapest and he founded the Real School Budapest, a project-based learning school with deep connections to both urban and environment and nature. Then he came back to Bali to take on the Green Educator course, a professional development program for educators around the world. So I'm happy to introduce the lead content creator for the Green Educators Network, and he's the education subverter and school startup specialist, Mr. Noan Venu. Is that how I pronounce it, Noan? Is that right?
Yeah, you got it right. Thanks for the awesome intro. So my name is Noan, and yeah, you took all of my thunder. Wonderful. So
No,
you got it.
I didn't mean to do that. And maybe
Not at all.
I guess traveling around various countries. I mean, maybe just as a quick anecdote, what have you noticed in terms of, let's say, the learners there? Was there any kind of interesting differences that you notice about the learners and all your experiences, whether Budapest, Bali, or Canada? Any commonalities among the learners that you've encountered there?
For sure. I mean, for one, you recognize kids everywhere have the same spirit. They are naturally inquisitive. There is a joy of learning that we are born with and that continues to grow in the right environment. Uh, there's, of course, cultural differences, but I think more amazing is actually how similar everybody is, regardless of what language you speak, what country you're from. Really, the overriding thing I've noticed is how similar human beings are.
That's great. And, it's nice to hear you validate that. So even if we're, have different unique cultures, or maybe we don't all speak the same language, I guess human beings learn very similarly and can learn from each other through those experiences as well. So I'd love to hear more from you as the session goes on. All right. So I'll now introduce our next speaker. So we've been graced with the second speaker today. Very excited to introduce her. She is a millennial teacher who has experienced many educational challenges, from having no cell phones and laptops in the classroom to using technology as an essential tool for learning, from creating detailed lesson plans to understanding by design. And actually, I'm going to ask her a little bit about that, what she means by that when I bring her on the stage. And she's also learned a lot about from teacher-centered learning to student-centered learning strategies. And we'll be discussing that more as we go along. With over 9 years experience of teaching, previously in Malaysia and the Philippines, she is currently an international social studies teacher at Surabaya Intercultural School, Indonesia. And her goals have made consistent despite her different stints in various countries, which are to tell stories based on facts, to build lifelong skills, as well as to collaborate with subject teachers and administrators in providing an effective providing effective real life projects to make student learning significant and successful. Okay, so she's very experience based, and she applies that to her teaching practice as well. In her spare time, she likes to illustrate, cook, read, and do yoga. So I'd like to introduce, she's a secondary school social studies teacher from Surabaya International School, Miss Jamaica Denise Mirador. Jamaica, glad to have
Hi,
you on the program
everyone.
today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, terima kasih. That's the only Indonesian I know. I hope that's right.
Okay, I'm still new here.
Okay, fantastic. But originally you hailed from Philippines, right?
Yes, I grew up in the Philippines and
And
worked there
then
for
you,
6 years.
okay, you worked there for quite a while, 6 years, and then you moved to Malaysia and then Indonesia. I mean, do you also can you corroborate with no one saying that learners, regardless of country, they're quite similar
That is true,
despite the
actually.
cultural? Yeah.
They are similar. They are determined to learn and overcome different challenges, online or offline.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, great. So, any Indonesian phrases you've learned while you're based there? I know you're quite new, but is there any interesting Indonesian phrase you'd like to kind of share with me or with the audience that I,
Oh
quick to
no!
learn?
Do not.
Oh, there's not.
Okay.
Okay, we have someone in the chat. I see someone on Facebook, on YouTube saying, Jeffrey, thank you, Jeffrey. Salamat datang. Okay,
Yeah.
so welcome. I guess that means welcome. So welcome to the program. Thank you, Jeffrey, for that. And then we have also a friend from Thailand, Ifran Nur Hidayat. Okay, Kabumkap for joining us all the way from Thailand. Fantastic. Okay, so Jamaica, I'm sure you also have a lot of interesting experiences to share with us about project-based learning and stuff, and of course, no one as well. So, what we'll do is we'll have like a quick discussion. Just share our thoughts and ideas about what project-based learning is all about and how you've applied it in your own context, in your own schools, and your own learning practice. And then towards the end of the show, we'll invite our audience to post their questions via Q&A. So we will be displaying a Mentimeter link. So once that's shown, please post any questions you may have about our topic. You can address it to me or to the speakers, and we'll make sure to make time for that towards the end of the program. And then after the Q&A session, I'll give instructions on how you can actually enroll in the course that accompanies our webinar today on the AcadAsia platform. And then you can complete the course there and then make sure you fill up all the assessments so that you can earn your CPD credentials. And the certificates that we'll be issuing from our AcadAsia platform also are digitally verifiable and secured on the blockchain. Okay, so you cannot tamper with it, you cannot Photoshop it, it'll be yours. So anyone who actually earns their certificate and their CPD points, you will have a blockchain certificate courtesy of AcadAsia. So please stand by until the end. Okay, so with those introductions done, I'd like to get into the meat of the discussion. So maybe I'll start with Noan first, and then you can chime in later a little bit, Jamaica. So for our nutshell to start with, so what is project-based learning exactly? So, and why is the shift in viewpoint and outlook important away from teacher-centered model towards encouraging students to learn more by doing on their own. Okay, so how do you define in a nutshell project-based learning? No one?
I think it brings two enormous needs into schools, which is relevance and context. It makes the learning real, and so project-based learning is any time that you move away from a set of defined objectives and shift more towards, all right, we're going to explore this area, and often you have less definition in what the outcome is going to be. You just recognize that as a group, you're going to go on an adventure and explore. So it blends inquiry and really the student agency so well.
Okay, that's super interesting though. And I like what you mentioned about kind of getting away from probably standard predefined objectives and letting the students and the project itself, I guess, lead the learning and for the students to lead themselves towards learning. Great insight there. Jamaica, how about you? How do you describe project-based
Mhm.
learning and the shift from teacher-centered to student-centered learning?
Right. Well, it is a student-centered learning approach wherein they solve real-world problems. And
Mm,
in PBL, we always involve a community so that we can have an
mm.
authentic learning.
Yeah, so yeah, I want to kind of touch on that. Yeah, involving community. That's a great definition. So how do you actually do that, and why is that important in the PBL approach? Why is the community essential for that?
Well, having a community in PBL, first, they will make our learning authentic, and we can
Mm,
tell that we're giving students a platform to contribute in our society. So we are telling them, even though you're young, you can solve problems.
yeah, right. And I guess Jamaica, in your particular case, do you apply this to younger learners? What's the age group of the learners that you're applying PBL with now?
So I am currently applying PBL to secondary high school students, so
Okay.
16 years old to 18.
Okay, not that young, but okay. So yeah, Noah, you wanted to chime in here. So why is community important when you talk about PBL?
Yeah, so beyond just providing them with something real and recognizing their impact and involvement, it also creates an audience, and it's somebody to do it for. So when you're moving away from a grades-based approach where that's what kids are working for, are their grades or marks, you need a new incentive. And being somebody who is creating for your community is an enormous incentive. You just see a whole new level of engagement and wanting to be more involved there.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Because more engagement, and they're creating for the community. So, what are they exactly expected to create? So, maybe just a brief idea. So, when they do PBL, what's kind of the basic format and structure, and why do you say the students are creating for their community?
Um,
Yeah, go ahead, Noy.
so, yeah, it really depends on the grade. I've had the joy of teaching everything from kindergarten all the way up to adults and
Hmm.
engaging most of them in PBL. Uh, when it comes to let's say a primary grade and needing that structure is sorry, I'm missing the question. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, so you mentioned that they are supposed to be creating for their community. So
Hmm.
maybe if you can give a brief example, how does that happen? So how does a student, let's say, create for their community in PBL?
All right. So when I was working with primary kids, we really wanted to display art and poetry, and actually
Mm,
we had to do this over COVID, and we knew
mm,
that we weren't able to bring people in, and so instead we took the same idea and we use QR codes to tag all these digital artifacts in a park that people went on for exercise. And it gave people that connection piece. It brought a lot of joy. It gave a chance for the parents to get out and take a walk. And you could just see all the kids feeling that relevance of being able to really contribute in a time when everybody needed it. And they're natural joy engines. They bring so much joy to people's hearts, and not having that was something that was missing for a while, and they were able to provide that with innovative ideas.
That's really cool. So it was an art project, and you had the kids kind of put QR codes on the art, and then when they would go out, they would scan that code and kind of share it with the community. Is that how it was?
Yeah, we had an app that geolocated their artwork in a park. And so at the beginning of the park, we had a poster that said, if you'd like to hear our poetry and our videos and our art pieces, download this app and take a walk. And then as you walk past a tree, it would activate a poem that a 6-year-old had written about their experience. A little further down, you would get a video that one of the 11-year-olds had created.
That's really cool. It's like you kind of applied a simplified version of augmented reality or virtual reality in the park by doing this program. That's fascinating. That's so cool. Okay, so we'll come back to that. We'll kind of delve a little bit deeper. How about you, Jamaica? I mean, for your own students, they're about senior high, I guess.
Right.
So what kind of things, fun things or project based things have you had them do, and did they actually create for their community? Were they actually solving some things? How did they get involved with their community through PBL?
Well, let's have my AP microeconomics class. So I asked them to have their own business, and whatever profit that they will be earning, that money will go to NGOs. So like the Habitat for Humanity. So that is one way for them to contribute. And I always have to make sure that their business it's anchored to our lesson. So that is a good way to apply what we've learned and at the same time helping our community.
Wow, that's really cool. So I mean, 16 to 18-year-olds, that's not that young, but already at that
Mhm.
point, you're getting them involved in project-based learning by let's say a business idea or some
So,
concept like that, and then any proceeds that they earn, they would have to give to a charity like Habitat or an NGO like Habitat for Humanity and what have you.
yes.
That's really, I mean, that's quite an experience for young people to have them, kind of engage in something like that so early. So, do you have examples, or can you share quick ideas of what kind of businesses they came up with, given the lesson? What lesson were you teaching at the time?
Actually, it's my current PBL. So
Okay.
they are still formulating their business. But
Okay.
I can show you a good example. I have my year 10 students. So it's
Hmm.
also a shop, and they are currently accepting pre-orders. And once
Hmm.
some of their classmates or schoolmates will order, they will deliver the food, and again the profit that they will be earning, they will give it to the NGO. So um, our topic it was about the Columbian exchange, and there are ingredients there that was originated from that exchange, like potatoes and what else? Cacao beans. So one of my students decided today, last time, like, oh, they had potatoes back then. So why not sell French fries? So they decided, okay, we're going to purchase French fries from the McDonald's, and we're going to sell it in a little bit higher price. So very interesting. And like one of my student, like Miss, I took coffee barista certificate. I can brew you coffee. So he's going
Hmm.
to brew coffee for the whole school, and that is one way for them to show their skills.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I guess they were learning about Colombia as a country, and Colombia was, I guess, one of their exports or agricultural products was cacao beans and potatoes, and you kind of developed, some ideas and projects out of that kind of cultural experience, right?
Yes.
That's so interesting. Quite fascinating there. Okay, so there's really a lot of things that can be done using PBL as an approach. That's super interesting. So maybe if we move on now. So now that you've given some examples of how you've applied PBL, and I guess how do, in your examples, how is it that it's becoming from a teacher-centered model towards a student-driven model where they're learning on their own? So what's happening, let's say, in your case, Jamaica, with the student projects, and then no one in your example with the art and the QR codes. So what made it move from being led by the teacher, now having the students, giving them agency to actually initiate the projects? If you could kind of share that shift, how is because we want to illustrate why PBL is different. So could you elaborate on that? Oh, anybody can go.
Okay, so I can go ahead. So my students has options to do
Mm.
or to solve any problems, and that is the PBL. So we let our students to choose what problems that they want to solve.
Right. Yeah. So if I can chime in, I think we have in our chat Miss Corazon saying PBL encourages empathy for the needy community, just like design thinking. All right. So Corazon, thank you for that. So I guess that's where you kind of have, design thinking is, human centered approach, look at the community and then solve problems from there. Okay. And because of that approach, you're giving more agency to the students to, think of, how to solve that issue on their own. How about you, Noah? How about the approach? Were the students the one who suggested the artwork, or how did it go about?
Yeah, I feel like at least with PBL, you move from a lot of planning and preparing into developing a really good toolbox and responding. And so with that, we had a vague idea that we wanted to be able to take kids out into the park. We knew that, and we wanted to do some kind of
Mm,
presentation. Didn't know what kind of
mm,
artifacts we were creating. We uh, didn't have necessarily some deep themes. We wanted that to come from our students, and that's their
mm,
inquiry piece. And so, how we prepare as a school is we become really proficient in design thinking. So, it was a great segue there. And I have design decks all around me for different types of design
nice.
that I have I learn continuously through them and work uh, with them regularly in class. Uh, it I have a lot of freedom in my role, and so we can work without necessarily outcomes, and that's a really important piece I think in PBL is that you you say, okay, we don't want to get these specific outcomes. We can exercise these skills, but the outcomes have to be a lot more fluid than uh, a learning outcome based curriculum gives.
That's really interesting. And I just want to show another comment from one of our friends in the chat. I think Neni Santika, I guess she's based in Indonesia, says they've been applying PBL since 2018. They called it Presentasi Karya Inovasi Santri. I hope I said that properly. And she says that PBL does work. So yeah, very interesting. That your outcomes usually is traditional teaching practice will have your outcomes be very regimented in terms of, let's say, what specific outcomes. And you're saying yes, you had skills that you wanted the students to apply, but the outcomes can be more flexible. Is that no one in your experience one of the benefits of PBL? I mean, does that flexibility and outcomes allow students to develop what we call deep content knowledge, right? They really engage and understand the topic much more deeply. And is that supportive of, let's say, 21st century skills such as critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, communication? These are some of the things Acadesia has been advocating since we've been doing our teaching training programs back in 2020. So these are the critical 21st century education skills. Does this PBL approach and flexible outcomes, you know, give the opportunity to kind of have, the skills applied to a more flexible outcome? What is that a benefit of PBL?
100%. And that's really, in my opinion, where the gold of PBL is. If you're looking at skills and developing them, now even the skills, you can adjust a project to focus on certain skills and help them with focus around those skills. But the reality is, because it's real life, all their skills are going to be applied and overlapped and have this really beautiful interplay. It it does require, I think, a a certain commitment from an education organization to step back a little bit away from the standardized based system. But in terms of what I see, it also does things amazingly well, like differentiation. You can have a diverse group of kids, and because they're working collaboratively on a project, they will kind of work towards their strengths. And your role as the facilitator is to come in and challenge their comfort zone a little bit. But it means that you can have a much more diverse range in a class rather than a content-based curriculum would.
Yeah, interesting. So I think the two key points you mentioned there is, as an organization or institution, you have to allow or take a step back to kind of see how you can apply PBL, especially if the institution is kind of used to a more, structured outcomes approach. And we can come back to that a little later. And of course, the second is, engagement on a diverse group, right? So I think Neneth, Isidro, well, we shared a comment on the screen a while ago, promoting teamwork among the students and made the learning a bit more authentic. So that really happens. Jamaica, do you concur with this? What are the benefits that you've seen in your students, and how they learn when you apply the PBL approach in your class?
Well, what I like about a PBL, we allow the students to commit mistakes and we give them time to reflect on it. And then after the realization, they will, oh, I got a mistake here. I should do better. And that's like a good moment for us teachers. We teach them or we guide them to know which one is correct, which one is wrong. So the students has the autonomy to redo again or to revise their work.
I like that. They have the autonomy and independence to kind of revise the work. And, we were talking about it. It's supposed to, PBL approach is supposed to encourage deeper content understanding. And I think one of the best teachers is experience. And if the experience is a mistake, is a negative, sometimes that teaches us better sometimes than getting the correct answer all the time. Wouldn't you say that, Jamaica? Is that also what you've seen in
Yes.
your students? How about you,
Mm.
Noah? Also, have you seen that as well?
Yeah, that to me is how you learn, is by having mistakes. And then, I mean, it's not just about having mistakes, but it's about having a mistake and reflecting on that and having a chance
Mm,
to think about, why didn't that work the way it is? And that to me is a really beautiful thing, when you can celebrate mistakes and celebrate that learning process, where you're not just saying, hey, there is one right answer. There's a million ways to get there, and we're trying all of them.
yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. In fact, when we talk about, I guess, PBL, I think one of the key benefits is there is because then you give the students the opportunity to try again. There are many ways and many approaches to come up with you know the 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 solution or the thing that you want to achieve. And there's no one way, but as they're discovering that and figuring that out, then the application of skills come. They whether they work well with each other or not. How do you test their resiliency in the face of adversity, right? If something doesn't go their way, can they cope? So all of these things, I guess, manifesting in PBL, are these some of also the benefits that you're seeing in your students? I mean, if you want to share even um, a real life example in your class, so whether that's, let's say, in cultural studies Jamaica, or in ecology, environmental awareness, no, and have you seen that kind of skills engagement and what we call adversity quotient, right? The student's ability to kind of bounce back. Have you been seeing that in your PBL practice?
For sure. I'll share. This is one of my favorite anecdotes. So we at Green School talk about sustainability all the time, and we use sustainability models. We discuss it in a holistic sense. And I took the year 11 students on I actually had them for 6 weeks, 5 of which they designed this experience. They spent 5 weeks almost full time in school designing a survival camp off grid. They did all the food prep. They learned how to do all of the fermentation if they want to take food, and preservations. They learned about how to create shelters, everything. We got to the island, and of course things go wrong. There was a lot of adversity. One of the students in reflection wrote this beautiful blog post that said, we talked a lot about sustainability, but I recognized that sustainability wasn't actually something that I was doing. And it came down to simply, he's like, because I wanted to walk around barefoot. And after 3 days of walking around barefoot, my feet were so injured, I could not sustain a life like that. And to me, that just anecdote right there was, this kid gets sustainability. He understands that your individual actions can have consequences on a larger, more sustainable scope.
Yeah, and I think from that example, when we define, for example, sustainability, I mean, there are also some kind of basic requirements or survival needs that we as humans need, right? So it's a balance, I think. It's great that we think about the environment. It's great that we're thinking about, how to preserve the present, planet for our, children's children, future generations. But then you also have to take into account your immediate needs at the moment. At that moment, he needed to kind of save his feet from getting injured, right? So, so how are you gonna buy the convenient plastic rubber slippers in the market, or are you gonna make some sort of, out of leaves or something? So how do you kind of, keep yourself healthy and yet, continue with your survival mission? So that's I can only imagine all the learnings that your students had to go through with that survival camp. That's super interesting. Yeah. So Jamaica, how about you? In your own experience, have you seen what's one of your favorite anecdotes, I guess, from PBL, and how your students have actually coped and improved their adversity quotient?
Well, I guess I have students who have ADHD, and
Mm,
for him it's very hard to concentrate. So
mm,
whenever I guide him, he'll do his best to concentrate and finish the task. And I know it's very hard for him, but every time that I see him work harder and do his best, that is enough for me to see that.
mm,
And I know
mm.
that he's applying all the skills and the knowledge that we've learned in the classroom.
Yeah, I think your example also points to, you know, one of the opportunities that PBL can be most effective, especially if it's special needs and, special learning requirements, um, in, like, for example, the Philippines, we call it ALS, right? So alternative
Mhm.
learning systems, right? You need to have different kinds of approaches in
Mhm.
terms of depending on your learners and where they're at. I think PBL is a very flexible tool to help, learners with special needs to achieve their, learning skills and outcomes. Yeah, and in the context of where the student is. So I think,
Mhm.
so yeah, even for ADHD students. How about you? I mean, do you agree with this, Jamaica, or is that kind of also a sense of where you're getting in terms of PBL application? Yeah,
Well,
yeah. Is so. Oh, okay, Noah, go ahead.
yeah, happy to just chime in. I mean, this is also some of the areas where there a little bit of caution needs to be exercised with
Mm.
PBL because it is chaotic. Uh, that's by nature what it is, and
Mm.
it very often involves a lot of cooperative elements. So there's a, a lot of social uh, intelligence involved in that, or not just intelligence, but you need some certain social skills. And so you can accommodate by creating group projects. What I've noticed is sometimes the lack of routine in a PBL environment can
Mm.
be pretty hard on kids who have exceptional needs. And so this is where you sometimes want to just create that balance and find accommodations for them.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I guess now we're seeing also, we're talking about a lot of the benefits, but there are also, I guess, two sides to a coin. There's always, another side of the story. So, maybe PBL and the structure or lack of it, that might not be as beneficial as we think, depending on the learner or the type of learner that we have who probably requires a bit more structure. Jamaica, have you had similar experience, or have you kind of tempered or adjusted your PBL depending on your learner in that case?
Yes, I in one class we have self-paced. They have different deadlines,
Hmm.
and that really help a lot of my students who has ADHD or ESL learners, and
Hmm.
giving them this autonomy help them to master specific skills and knowledge before moving forward to the next.
Right, right. So the PBL gives them autonomy, but at the same time, you still keep some sort of structure in place, right? Because sometimes, as no one was describing, um, it might not always be helpful to give too much freedom, or you kind of have to kind of set some boundaries and try to kind of help guide the students towards, a more objective outcome as well, not just kind of keep it all freewheeling. And I guess that happens when you're also need to define which community you're engaging, what are the problem areas, and within those boundaries, then you can kind of create the learning experiences and have the students create solutions. I think I just want to highlight a couple of comments here from Manolita White from Cebu City. I guess you're using your husband Walter's account, but you're saying instead of lectures and books and learning, teachers can think through the steps required to solve a problem and use those steps as project-based activities, right? And that points towards also having some structure in your PBL, right? It's not always too free flowing. You kind of have to identify some steps as you go through it. And if I move on now to our next, question here, which is, can PBL really work as a pedagogical approach in the classroom? I mean, as you mentioned, I guess Noah, you at the top of the program, you had to do it, um, especially since you were not able to go on face to face. But does it matter? Does it matter if you're face to face or online, or and does it matter depending on the year level? Like for example, Jamaica, you had kind of most experience with senior high learners or high school learners, but is there any specific parameters for it to be a effective pedagogical approach? I mean, does face to face or online matter? Does year level matter? What kind of boundaries or kind of parameters do we need to set when we're doing PPL?
Yeah, for me, I believe it doesn't matter at all. With this exception, PBL, when you're looking at kindergarten, grade 1, the P stands for play, because that's them creating their own projects. And they are ultimately, that's what play is a self-guided learning experience. It's free form. So in a lot of ways, PBL has this weird inverse of a lot of what we consider in normal teaching, where we go from scaffolding to removing the scaffold, just because we're innately wired to learn through play. The more freedom we leave in the early years, I think, for play-based learning rather than creating projects, to me, is where you can get a big win. And then likewise, you really have to think about the complexity. One of the things that I do all the time that's probably not healthy is I overestimate how complex or how simple a thing will be, and so it becomes a lot more complicated, and there's a lot of gaps in the knowledge. And that's actually why I think you need to bring kids in to the project design process, because listening to them, they will help you find projects that are meaningful to them, relevant to them, and you don't get carried away with grand visions in that sense. In terms of online, I had some amazing project-based learning experiences online, but it's not ideal. You want to be with people, and you want to be able to have face-to-face arguments, because that's a lot of what happens, and discussions, and be able to float around a bit to hear other ideas that are coming about.
Okay, interesting. So my takeaways from your suggestions here, I guess if it's younger, they should play more, not so much specific objectives. And then from here on, regarding online versus face to face, you're saying that face to face sometimes is still more effective in PBL, because as you're having discussions with the team or your group mates, nothing beats physically being with them. But I guess then during the time of the pandemic, you had to make do with whatever tools you had, right? Because there'll be another situation where we can never say, let's say in what country we're in, there might be a volcanic eruption or some another kind of war, or some kind of military exercise that prevents our students from gathering face to face. So it'd be interesting to learn whatever insights you had in how to kind of transpose as best as you can. I know face to face is still the best, but how do you do PBL in whatever online manner that as best as you've seen, at least in your experience? I'll come back to you later, Noah. Maybe okay. Jamaica. So how about yourself in terms of seeing? Does it matter if it's face to face versus online, or the age group? Is it? Does it matter who you can apply PBL to?
For me, it doesn't matter whether it's online or not, as long as the project is feasible and challenging enough for them. And as a teacher, if you will provide them criteria like rubrics or tasks, that will be enough for them to do their project. And when it comes to the year level, well, it doesn't pick any year levels, to be honest. It just have to make sure that what is this? That the skills that you're measuring, that you're expecting from them, they can do it.
Okay. And that I kind of leads also to some of the structure you need to place, right? So PBL, maybe there's a misconception that, it's free flowing and you let the students do whatever you want. But I like what you mentioned, Jamaica, about rubrics, about setting some sort of expectations and guidelines also, so that there is some scaffolding or some structure to their PBL experience, right? And then as you're kind of guiding them with these boundaries, then they have the freedom within that space to kind of become creative and learn their skills that way. Okay, fantastic. So I'll come back to you, Noah, again. So we were talking about that, right? So you're mentioning
the
not
face to
face
face
to
versus
face.
online.
Yeah, is really, you know, actually the best. But maybe as best as you can recall, what online techniques kind of approximate, or had seen success, at least as close as face to face as possible. I know it's not the same, but are there any learnings that you've seen applying online techniques?
Yeah, so when you're face to face, the students have a lot more chance to work within the gray area. So online, you just have to be more explicit and provide more structure,
Mm,
more support. Uh, you can still do projects, but uh, you're working more out of an instruction set. Needs to be done, then this, then this, then maybe them designing that process. So you need to take a couple steps back from an authentic project-based learning environment in a sense,
mm,
and
mm.
provide some of those steps, in my opinion. The thing that I found worked beautifully though was a type of project where it's game-based learning, and so we did role-playing games online, and
Mm.
there was tons of incentive and motivation there. We had really positive contributions, and uh, a game is a very relevant project to kids all over the world these days.
Yeah, and I think that inserts the element of play, right? If they have some sort of game, a goal in the game, whether that's a high score or, best whatever and what have you. I think making it fun, then that allows them to see the steps that you've created in your virtual requirements. They can see a immediate, or what do you say, like an instant gratification in terms of the goal they have to achieve by doing that. And yeah, I agree with you. Like if it's online, I it makes sense to have the steps more laid out more explicitly. You really have to name this, rather than have the students kind of define their pathways themselves. And then I guess within those steps, then they can be more creative. But you have to kind of set the cookie crumbs or the breadcrumbs so that they follow that, to kind of win in the game, right? So to speak. Yeah, absolutely. So, and just chime in, Jamaica or no one, if you have any additional ideas or thoughts about that, because that's quite interesting in terms of using PBL as a pedagogical approach, right? So there still needs to be some objectives, some structure to it, whether it's face to face, online, face to face. You can see the dynamics, and you're able to observe that better. But you can approximate it, as much as you can, uh, through a gamified online environment, I guess.
And just to chime in, I think that working with secondary students is a totally different experience when it comes to PBL and online. They already know their tools, they already have
Mm.
uh, solid research skills, and they've got the independent piece down. With primary kids, it becomes a little more challenging in that sense.
Yeah, I imagine if they're young, they kind of either have their guardians or their parents with them, or you kind of have to handhold them a bit more because they're still quite young. All right, so maybe since we're kind of touching on the topic a little bit as well, I'll move on. You know, we mentioned earlier that sometimes some learners probably are not that disciplined if you do the PBL approach and it's still quite free form, right? So I guess that touches on some of the main challenges when applying PBL, because it's not always successful, it's not always easy. So maybe if you could share, I don't know if you've had your own experiences on this, when has it become a challenge, and perhaps what do you do when the learners are resistant to the approach, meaning they're not participating. Maybe it's a group project, even if it's face to face, they're kind of aloof, and they're kind of apathetic about it, or maybe even if you give them enough freedom to kind of develop their own solution pathways, they're not kind of submitting, or presenting the output for that step. So what are the kind of the challenges are you seeing with PBL? How do you handle resistance to that approach?
So I can answer that one. So for instance,
Mm,
like what you said earlier, what if these students doesn't like project. So
Yeah.
for me, my technique in the first semester, I need to know their interest. I need to know them.
Mm,
Having that
mm.
data, I will find a way to, for or let's say, make a project that is based on their interest. So that when I make additional projects or tasks, I know that they will do it because they like it. It's based on their interest. And sometimes I make my project, oh, for instance, guys, do you think this project will be good for you? Do you think this will be fun for us? And by asking them or involving them in making projects, that will be easy for everyone.
That's a great insight, Jamaica, because you're tapping into what the learner is most interested about. What do
Mhm.
they like, right? So again, we're moving away from the teacher-led approach where typically the teacher's always right. We dictate, you do this, you do that. Right now, you try to listen a little bit to the student or the learner. What do they like, and try to craft that into the PPL activity. Jamaica, if I can ask a little bit more, can you give an example of that
Ah,
specifically? So, what was an interest of your learner that they kind of then, after you kind of weave this interest of this into the lesson, they got really excited? Can you be more specific?
well, they like to experience business, and this
Okay,
is a history class, and they want to
history
experience
class.
business.
Okay.
And some of them wanted to be part of student council. So, okay,
Mm,
let's do something about it. So, I decided let's create a website wherein you can discuss about history, and at the same time, you will have Google Form so that you can get there your pre-orders. So, those students who are very good at art, they will make the posters. So, those
mm,
students who are good in leading or administrating stuff, they are their team called administrative staff, so they are in charge of making emails, checking out whether the information in the websites are correct. And then we also have sales team, so
mm.
they're interested in selling, they're interested in accounting. So I made sure that they have a spot in that project wherein they can practice the skills that they want to learn. So, well, that's one way.
Okay, interesting, fantastic. How about you, Noan? In your side, what are one of the challenges, and how do you handle resistance to PBL?
So, in my experience, the biggest resistance comes from within education institutions because
Oh, so not necessarily the learners, huh?
not the learners, because PBL
Mm.
classrooms feel kind of crazy. You you walk by a normal classroom, everybody's sitting at their desk and doing these things. You walk by a PBL class in session, and it's going to be noisier. There's kids going here and there. Uh, the teacher isn't at the front of the classroom. They're off in some corner chasing up somebody. It feels a little more chaotic. And so you really
Mm.
need support from your colleagues and from the administration, I think, first and foremost, to really embrace that. Uh, and when it comes to kids, I feel that the biggest challenge is actually kids who have been conditioned to succeed in tests. So those who are used to taking a test and getting an A, PBL doesn't hit the same dopamine receptors. They're less likely
Mm.
to be like, this is amazing learning. Some of them are, but I find that it's more the fringe who are on the other side of the spectrum who are never getting the amazing test grades and stuff who are like, ah, I like this. This is exciting. This is something I can do. And so I think there's a bit of deprogramming that sometimes is needed when it comes to certain kids.
Yeah, I like that reprogramming. It's like it's the paradigm shift doesn't only happen with us educators who are learning a new pedagogy approach in PBL, but as you've mentioned at the beginning, the institution itself, they need some sort of a little bit of openness and paradigm shift. Because if I'm, let's say, if I'm a principal or a dean and I'm walking by the classroom and say, why is no one's class so noisy? Why are they all running around? What are they doing? Are they actually learning something? So PBL is telling us they might actually be learning more in a slightly more chaotic or controlled chaos, right? I think we're trying to achieve a bit of controlled chaos where it's more animated and yet they're still learning something. And the second part of what you mentioned is, yeah, it's interesting. There are the learners who are used to getting A's in tests, in objective, empirical, summative, formative tests that, you ask a specific question, they give a specific answer. They're not going to be as excited as, okay, so where's the test? Where do I write the answer? And then you check it and it's correct. So because of the free form or more implied outcome nature of PBL, maybe they won't be as interested. So that's interesting because then, yeah, go ahead, Noah.
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, I've met kids of all sorts. That's so some of them are like that. But it's just something to be aware of, is that they require a bit of that shift. There's a third group in here that I feel really important to address, and that is the parents.
The parents.
It's really nice to have clear lines of communication about what your intentions are and what you're doing and how you're doing it with the parents, because when that works out well, you create strong bonds with them and they are very supportive. But if they don't know what's going on and their kids start talking about these crazy things, they can sometimes feel like, what's going on in this school? So beware.
That's so true. That's so true. The parents are always part of the equation, and they should kind of have some awareness or involvement so that they know, what their kids are doing, what their learners are doing. Jamaica, have you had similar experience like this with the parents in particular? Or has your experience been most of the parents understand when they go to your school in their class, the PBL approach is expected, or what's
Oh,
your experience?
well, I had a bad experience with the parents. It was
Mm,
like my first few years, and it was my first time implementing PBL. So I was basically
mm.
new. So the problem was I grade them as a group. So that became an issue. So how about those students who are not doing their job properly and they're
Yes.
receiving the same A's? So that became an issue. Like, and I told myself, oh no, why am I doing this? So I have to change. So I have to
Okay.
search a better way to implement PBL. So I
Mm,
finally have my own way. So that will be, I am grading my students individually. So each
okay.
student, any group project, they have their own task. And at the same time, they have their own rubric. So going back to my example earlier, so in my history class, if you're in charge in making a poster, then you have your own rubric. If you are in charge in writing an article, then that will be your rubric. So I know when you hear group project, your output, it will be collective, right?
Mm,
So in their grade book, it will show only their individual grade. And
mm,
if they're going to ask me, is how about our output? And I will tell them these output, we will going to let's say reflect on it. Did you do well as a group? Did you do well as a class? So we're going to
mm.
take a look at your values, not your individual output.
Okay, so that's interesting. So you kind of expanded your grading, and I'm gonna touch on a question that's come in from our Mentimeter
Yeah.
post here. I just because your answer is already answering this question. Okay, and the question is, how does grading work in project-based learning, especially considering that not all students may participate equally well in projects? All right, so your answer there is, I guess you have a combination where you have individual rubrics for individual tasks, but as a group, there's a reflective rubric, so to speak, that, as a group, did
Mhm.
you learn something? So you're kind of grading both individual and group work together, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, at the same time. How about you, no one? Have you experienced this? What's your techniques for grading group work in PBL?
So I'm in a very privileged spot. I do not have to create grades for students
Hmm.
in any of the schools I've worked in so far. Uh,
Hmm.
However, uh, the feedback process is really important. And actually, through student voice, I have brought in grades and scales. And one that I loved that was optioned by a colleague of mine was something called holistic scoring, where basically we have a rubric. It's a set of descriptions of how they engaged in the project. And that rubric goes to the students to self reflect. And they just pick a number and write it down. I do the same based on my very broad understanding. And then you look at the two numbers side by side, and if they're aligned, great. But if they're very different, you've got a conversation
Hmm.
with the student, and you're like, well, sometimes most of the time, actually, students are pretty critical of themselves, and it's a great chance to support and advocate for them and boost their self confidence. Uh, but sometimes students don't recognize that, hey, you know what? When you were talking in the group, it wasn't like you were talking towards a common objective. You need to you need to be a bit more of an active listener and hear some strategies, and so you can support them on a specific thing that you've noticed.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So it sounds to me like, you have the students grade themselves and you grade them, and then if there's a discrepancy, maybe that's an opportunity to discuss, right? Because then in your situation, it'll depend. So, like, but then, just to share with you, and I'm sure you're aware of this already. In other schools, in other classrooms, other students, they'll probably always grade themselves very high because their objective is really just to get a high grade in the class, right? So I guess the takeaway there is you have to apply based on your learner
Yeah.
type or
Well,
how your learners are, right?
that's where the conversation piece comes in. And
Okay.
if it's self-evaluation, no questions asked, they're going to just say, well, yeah, sure, I'll give myself 10, whatever. But if
Yeah.
it's like, hey, if there's a discrepancy, we talk. And IB does this for how they grade tests, uh, all their exams. You write, and
Hmm.
multiple teachers grade, and if the grades are too far off, they recognize that there might be an issue with how a educator is grading. And you can use the same strategy for students. Generally, they're a lot more honest when they know there's some kind of uh, yeah.
A
I don't want to say
counterpoint
oversight, but
yeah,
accountability.
yeah, like
Yeah.
I've even heard, some educators, they have the learners grade each other, but then you're not, maybe, I'll invite, this is actually Nilesh's example. He's how he does his techniques. You're not allowed to give the same grade to everybody in the group. You're supposed to give different grades, but the discrepancy is a bit, not that, just 1 point down, and every session that you grade, you can kind of even it out at the end, right? So interesting. Okay, yeah, so Neil is posting his grade. That's how he does it. Okay, so and then, uh maybe there's a bunch of questions right now. In fact, we have about 20 minutes left in the time, but we might need to go a little bit over because the deluge of questions is so many. Okay, so maybe I'll just kind of go on to maybe the last part of this, before we get into the Q&A. Just our last question. So how do you know when PBL is successful, right? So, in your, general experience, when you've kind of done PBL for the semester, for whatever project or however long, what are your kind of, metrics, or how do you say that yes, the PBL did work or it did not work? or there's some tweaking that needs to be done?
Well, if the project output is a disaster, definitely. But to make sure that your PBL will work, my advice would be first, you have to introduce the project at the beginning of the semester. You have to set your
Mm,
expectation high. You need to let them know that these are your targets for the semester or for the whole academic year. And then slowly
mm,
you scaffold the skills or knowledge that
mm,
you think is a requirement in order for them to be successful in PBL. And lastly, the most important thing, so as a teacher, you must always give them timely feedback. You always have
mm,
to give them feedback, or else they will assume, oh, my teacher is not correcting me. So I will just continue what I'm doing. So it's very important
mm.
to give them feedback.
So is that every week, Jamaica? Every week, kind of
Mm,
end of week, you have or start of the week, you already have feedback. How often do you recommend feedback be given?
it depends on the activities. For
Okay.
instance, in making a website, so one of them is assigned to write an article. So first draft, they have to show it to me, and I will give them a feedback so that they can
Mm,
revise until they can pass the standards. So it's also very important for our students to have time to revise their work because that's how
mm.
learning takes place.
Right. And I guess if the classroom size is quite big, I imagine you can do individual checking if there are fewer, let's say 20 or 30 students. But
Yeah.
let's say for our some of our educators here, obviously they would have big classroom sizes, 50 or 60. So they have to, I guess, adjust the checking so that it matches, right? Or adjust the feedback mechanism so that, let's say, maybe into different groups, maybe you can give general feedback per group, right? But obviously, your mileage may vary. So dear teachers in the audience, so please adjust to your classroom sizes, obviously. How about you,
Mhm,
Noan? How do you know
Yeah,
when the PBL worked or not?
I, I I guess the most simple indicator is if kids are leaving school with smiles on their face and talking about this outside of school time, you know it's working. Uh, and for
Hmm.
me, it comes down to just straight up well-being of the individual. I I deeply believe that there's no such thing as a person who doesn't want to contribute and be a productive member of society deep down. And PBL provides that avenue in school. So uh, smiling kids, that's how I know. Not just smiling, but engaged, excited about learning, and not saying, "When's school gonna finish?" Uh, and then going on that feedback piece, just something that I really recognize is feedback is given all the time. So a lot of what we do as educators in PBL is continuously tapping into groups and providing the informal prompts and the feedback about their process, whether it's the skills that they're using and how they're using, or around the content that they are producing. And uh, I've never taught a class of 60 kids, so I'll be straight up there. But I
Hmm.
can imagine uh, finding ways to kind of make feedback a viral process. So it's not just your feedback they're looking for, but it's the feedback of others and building mechanisms for that into it. It it's essential to have feedback in project-based learning, and giving feedback is almost as important as receiving feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess feedback mechanisms for bigger groups, like we had highlighted in the chat a while ago. So if it's group, maybe you can have the individuals grade each other, the learners grade each other on a scaling basis, 5 4 3 2 1 or what have you. And then depending on the contribution or outcome for that week, then they have to justify why I gave my teammate a 1 and not a 5, and what have you. And then eventually at the end of the sem, the grades kind of even out depending on how they contribute. Because a lot of the questions now, I'll move on to the Q&A because there's a lot. We have more like there's just so many. There's one question here. Are part of the challenges of PBL also have to do with, aside from face-to-face, online, or age groups, how about financial situation or access to resources? Meaning, is PBL not applicable to under-resourced schools or learners, or you can still do PBL even if you have not as many resources, or the financial capability of the learners is a bit challenging? What do you think?
I think they can still do it. They just have to find a
Hmm.
platform for them or for their students to be involved in any community.
Hmm. Yeah. Go ahead, Noan.
It almost is better when it's under resourced because the constraints just become like, hey, here's where we are. The
Yeah,
biggest
yeah.
resource is human resources, but in terms of materials, if you're like, here's some spaghetti sticks, create a superstructure, kind of thing. People get creative.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the necessity is the mother of invention. So if the students have only so much they can do, I think they can be more creative, right? But obviously, it'll be a challenge for some. But that's where the real PBL happens, because then how do you make something out of the limited resources that you do have? Yeah, I agree with this. I guess some are saying it's regardless of content or subject area. I presume if it's not generally, it can be applied to any age level, then it can also be applied to any subject area, right? It's not a limitation. It just depends on how you structure the activity. Okay, here's this one question regarding parents as a part of the situation. I think Jamaica, you already mentioned that at the start of the SEM, you kind of make the objectives clear that this is the PBL, right? But the question here is, how do you address honesty issues with checks that are required and submitted that are really work of online learners and not their parents? Okay,
Ooh,
so if es- especially if they're elementary learners or younger. So we are talking about a while ago. Usually, if it's younger, you kind of have to kind of handhold them more, and maybe they're assisted more.
yeah,
But how do you address the
yeah.
honesty of the work? Okay, who's doing the work actually, especially for online learners?
As a teacher, you can tell easily who's doing their homework, but you cannot
Okay,
find out who. So, so
okay, okay.
um, and what happened? We knew that during the pandemic, they had tutors. So when they
Hmm.
came in back offline, we knew immediately that they were not the one who's doing their work. So the children
Hmm.
suffered. So what happened?
Hmm.
We talked to the mom. We also talked to the principal, like this is the output, and we need. Of course, we cannot blame the student. We cannot blame the mom for hiring a tutor. So instead of highlighting that one, we decided we need to support your child more. We're going to have extra accommodation for that kid. Um,
So is that like remedial classes or extra work? What do you mean by
Yes, so
supporting them?
we pull out that student because he really
Okay.
couldn't catch up because he's an
Okay.
ESL student, and because of the pandemic,
Mm.
there is a huge gap in his English skills.
Mm. Mm. So you kind of had to make a kind of a special remedial or
Yes.
tutorial work for him so that they can for that student so that they could catch up. Okay. Okay, understand. How about you, no one? Huh? How do you handle that? Well, I guess it's easier because in your school maybe it's face to face and you really have more more direct contact with the learners. But have you experienced that where you
Oh
think
yeah,
someone else is
and
doing the learner's work for them?
you know what? It absolutely project-based learning. Actually, it would be a dream if every parent sat down with their kid and worked through a project. Uh, the the risk is if somebody takes it away from the kid, takes the opportunity away, and does it all on their own. If the student cannot create that work on their own, but is part of that process, they're learning in a richer environment than actually we could probably hope to create in the class with somebody they love, especially. That would be amazing. Uh, and that's where grading uh, the product can sometimes fall flat, whereas grading the process is something that you can do as a piece. It's like, hey, where are you at? How did you get there? And understanding more the process than the product, because then it kind of falls on the kid to be part of that rather than the product oriented piece.
Understood. Okay. Yeah, we don't have enough time. There's so many questions. I'm just trying to group all these questions together. And some of these actually have been answered already earlier as we were discussing. But there's one question here about what are some of the tools that can be used to facilitate PBL online, right? So we've described a lot of tools offline. So you have community-based projects or, trying to see where they are. Can you recommend any online tools that can help facilitate PBL that you've tried before?
I can go. Well, we always use Google Classroom, the Google
Mm,
site for making website, Google Docs so that they can collaborate. We also have Google
mm,
Form in case they want to make survey. And when it comes
mm.
to making poster, they can use Canva. And
Okay.
there are a lot of things. You have the YouTube, and if you have
Mm,
ESL students, you know that you can turn on the subtitles and change it into
okay.
different language, right? So
So there are really a
that's
lot of online tools. In fact,
mhm.
here in Acadesia, the platform that our audience will be taking the course on, Canva is built right into Acadesia. So if you need any PBL projects that require Canva, very easy to insert Canva activities in Acadesia. Fantastic. How about you, Noan? Any tools
Yeah,
online
I
you
have
can
my
suggest?
favorites for sure.
Mm.
Number one for me is Miro. Figma works
Miro.
really nicely as well. But just for that collaborative brainstorming, it's just beautiful to see what kids can create there. Uh, and then on a more simple level, something like Coggle, which is another brainstorming tool,
Mm.
is great. Uh,
Mm.
but those are my go-tos, especially when building something complex.
That's really great. I think last month actually was design thinking. The theme of Acadesia series was design thinking, and I had demoed Miro. So if any of you want to go back to that, we have a bunch of courses and webinars. We did Miro last month, so you can check that out. Very cool. Okay,
Yeah,
one
I'm
more
addicted
question
to
before we
it.
wrap up to
I love it.
housekeeping and last thoughts, final thoughts from our speakers. Um, Maybe we can also pull in okay, here maybe Jake. I guess Jake is here in the audience. Maybe I'll pull him in if he's available just to answer a couple of more questions here, Jake. Yeah, so maybe Jake, in the Philippine context, right? For project-based learning, I know like some of our in fact some of our colleagues had done PBL before. Do you concur with Noah and Jamaica's feedback in terms of PBL? I mean, how was your experience in terms of doing PBL and given the challenges or the positives that PBL had?
Oh yeah, definitely, Roy, and thanks to Noan and Jamaica for sharing us wonderful insights about PBL.
Mm.
As we use PBL, Roy, student engagement is so high. I remember having to tell students to actually go home and stop working on their projects. But they did stay in school and did ask permission from us and from their parents to stay very late at night to be with their group mates to work. But what really was was very significant, Roy, was the mindset that the students had after going through a PBL unit. This was crystallized further because when I had the chance to interact with some of our alumni who were in college, they were
Mm.
talking to me about how that problem solving mindset has really helped them not just get good marks or grades in college, but confront the basic challenges or the basic issues that they encounter, whether in academics or even in their respective communities. So more than the grades, more than the process, it's also that the instilling of that paradigm, that mindset, that whatever problem comes before them, because they went through PBL, because they experienced PBL, they know that there are ways to get things done. coming up with, answering their driving question, or learning how to work with others, seeing how they can break down the problem into smaller, more manageable chunks. Those are the great benefits that we've been hearing from our students and have been seeing from their experience. So all these, come together quite nicely at the end of it all, Roy. So it's really something that, that's working, and I hope that our teachers in the audience will definitely give a shot or try.
Okay, fantastic, Jake. Thanks so much for those encouraging anecdotes that it really, can you believe it? The students don't want to go home. They want
Yeah.
to stay. So for a success, that is, I think, an indicator that your PBL was successful. If the students are staying behind to finish the project, that's fantastic. Just one more round of questions before we get the final thoughts. There's one just very practical tips. I know we mentioned it a while ago. A question here is how do you meet the academic requirements of content in a PBL system, right? So, and then in a traditional school that is trying to transition towards PBL, how do you recommend to the administrative team maybe plan a 3-year development plan towards this, training the teachers and the parents? Okay, so I guess grading, how do you grade PBL, and how do you recommend this to admin if they haven't tried PBL before?
Maggie, no?
Um,
Yeah, so first, yeah, go ahead, Jamaica, go ahead.
okay. So for me, I have to make sure that they have great foundation when it comes to the content, and most
Mm,
especially with their skills. And if
mm.
I see the result that they have passed the standards, we can do the PBL, because we cannot do it if they don't have a strong foundation.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Jake? Grading PBL, is this related to performance tasks, or how would you kind of grade or the academic component of PBL?
Yeah, definitely, Roy. Alignment is key to academic standards or expectations. Before the start of it all, what in my experience, what we do is we throw the driving question at the students, and then we immediately discuss the grading criteria with the students.
Mm,
What the rubrics for the different aspects of the projects are, how each one will be graded in terms of participation or their contribution to the overall project. As you said, it all has to be written. It all has to be clearly laid out to them. And the teacher's role is very crucial here, because as the inquiry into, let's say, the context of the project takes place, the teacher has to handhold a bit at the start of the project and make sure that the
mm,
scaffolds are in place, so that whatever
mm,
output or submission it is that the students will be turning in will be properly graded or assessed by the teacher, and then slowly the teacher lets go of the students, and lets them explore and carry on with the experimentation. But as I've mentioned earlier, the criteria has to be clear. And in fact, in the school where I was head of before, we even made the students sign a sort of a social contract, no one in Jamaica, so that they
mm.
would all agree to the different terms that the group has to abide by as they go on through that PBL unit. And they displayed the social contracts on the bulletin boards in their classroom
Wow,
as a
that's
sign of
a that's an
commitment to the
that
project.
that that's an
Yes,
that's yeah, that's amazing, because you have actually the students committing to the goals of the
yes,
project, and they actually sign something to show for it. That really gets them
right.
fully engaged, I guess, right? How about you, Noan? Grading, and how do you kind of introduce this to traditional school if they want to try it for the first time?
Yeah, I actually feel there's a element of bravery that comes with bringing in PBL because it's new. My biggest recommendation is you have to be willing to give up stuff. Uh,
Hmm.
there's just too much in schools right now, too
Hmm.
loaded. And so when you say, let's add another thing, uh, the administration should generally go, well, what are we going to take away? What are we going to reduce, simplify, so that we can make room for this? Because PBL takes time, it takes a lot of energy. Uh, the payout is enormous, but uh, it's a beautiful place to start to shift the paradigm of education. It has some strong foundations, but I think there needs to be a very serious conversation about what are we not going to do so that we can do this.
That's a great insight, Noam, because I can imagine our educators can relate very clearly that yeah, there's a give and take here. Try to see what, let's say, curriculum or learning outcomes can be kind of enhanced or substituted with this PBL approach, and maybe you can still hit two birds with one stone, so to speak, right, and still be able to have the ability to do some PBL, maybe one project at a time, not necessarily an entire semester thing. Maybe just try to some point projects to try it out, pilot it, and then if it's kind of successful, then you can start rolling out. So yeah, I agree here in the comment, kind of have a longer term plan, maybe 3 years down the road or maybe a year ahead to try it out. Okay, we are completely out of time, we're over time. Maybe just one round of final thoughts before I can share with the audience how they can earn their certificate. So PBL is such a very interesting topic. It's not as you know um, obvious on how to apply it, and I think we've gained a lot of insights. Anyone who's here, please rewatch the discussion. I think it's super interesting. So I'd like to get insight from our panelists, your final thoughts on the pros and cons, and probably why would you recommend PBL to educators here. So anybody who's ready to give their final thoughts, please go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. All
Um,
right, go Jamaica. Okay.
PBL is a very good strategy. So I recommend everyone to apply it, but you have to make sure that you plan ahead. You need to plan like 1 year because if you will not structure your lesson plan effectively, then you cannot execute PBL um, well, because you have to make sure that you're going to anchor everything in your curriculum, especially with your school standards. And take note that you also have to give them chance to revise their work and give them time, also autonomy to do their work. And that's it.
Okay, thank you so much in Jamaica. All right, final thoughts? No one?
Yeah, sure. And I love that Jamaica mentioned giving time. There's a couple mantras I bring into my head. Doing everything twice so that you get a chance to iterate. That's part of a design process. And then also stretch it out. Give the space and time so that things can be internalized and understood. You can do very short tap-ins to PBL, and that's maybe a really nice spot for a school who has no space for it. Just take a day off timetable, and bring in some kind of PBL challenges in there. Uh, but it's to me one of the most exciting things that you could do in a learning environment, and it really leads to what I think a better quality of education. So
Thanks, no one. Jake, final thoughts on PBL?
Yeah, finally, Roy, I remember the first time we implemented PBL, both students and teachers were calling it PB hell.
Hell.
But yeah, because it's a messy process, it's not clean all the time, right? And then there's a
uh,
lot of adjustment and transition to a new paradigm that they had to go through. But at the end of it all, they saw the rewards. They found the benefits of PBL, and from then on until now in the school where we were before, they're still implementing PBL, and they wouldn't have it any other way. So it just is not PBL does not just make learning memorable, but also very meaningful. If we do it right, if we support each other, if we have a community that can come together and bring forward, PBL into our schools and communities, then it really works well for everyone. So teachers, be brave and courageous in implementing or trying PBL in your schools and classrooms.
Thanks so much, Jake. And yeah, try to give it a try. Maybe pocket, as no one was suggesting, just pocket programs or pocket activities until you get the hang of it, and plan it out and make sure it's integrated to curriculum. Thanks so much, ladies and gentlemen, for that fantastic discussion. I'm just going to now do a little bit of housekeeping just so that everyone knows what to do next. So, fantastic discussion. Really amazing. So, for you to actually get your certificate, that is included with this webinar. So for those of you who are not yet on acadasia.com, I hope most of you are, but if you're not, just go to our website or our mobile app. We now have it available on iOS and Android. You can download it as well. Log in, or if you're creating an account for the first time, make sure you sign up as a teacher, okay? Because students will have limited features. Partners are for institutions or heads of the organization who want to manage their teacher communities in their schools. But if you're a teacher and want to avail of the course and the certificate that comes with it, please sign up as a teacher, fill up all the information, and once you log in and complete your profile information, you'll see, of course, our various services here. We have Colab Ed for social networking, Design Ed for course construction, Skill Ed for our learning and upskilling. So in fact, here I have a friend, Miss Ann Bu Nguyen from Vietnam, who just joined us a few hours ago. I'll just say welcome to her. Okay, so you can chat and create communities together here, and hopefully we can support your PBL journey on Acad Asia when you join. Then after you come in and complete your profile and interact with us, go to Skilled Ed and look for the courses. Let me just refresh. I hope it's launched already. Here, Deeper Learning Through Project-Based Learning. Okay, so there's a course here available. So make sure that you enroll in this course. We already have some people enrolled. Okay, so when you click on the course, you'll see it here. And in the course, you'll have several sections. Make sure that you, of course, watch our webinar today and submit your reflection video. And there's an exit survey. And then here, there's a CPD attendance form for teachers in the Philippines. Okay, this is the last lesson. Make sure that you fill up this attendance form with all the information that you see required here. That way, we can count your participation in attending the course as well as completing all the other requirements in our asynchronous course towards your qualification for CPD points. Okay, so again, this entire month, we'll be awarding CPD points for the 3 activities that we have this month. This is the first one. We have Technology Tuesday next week, and we have Acad Asia Teacher Spaces Thursdays the week after. By completing all those sessions, you'll earn a total of 3 CPD points. Okay, so just enroll in the course with your Acad Asia account and make sure you fill up also your attendance form here with correct information. You have to complete the course and a correct attendance form, or else you will not be given the CPD points that accompanies this certificate. Okay, so with that, make sure to create your Acad Asia accounts. And on behalf, again, of our speakers today, guys, this was really amazing. Next week, Technology Tuesday, November 8th, please sign up on our sign-up sheet here on the website, this web link. Make sure that you sign up for that if you want to attend and get the next set of CPD points in the Philippines for next week. On behalf of Acad Asia, our speakers, Noan and Jamaica and Jake, thank you so much. I'm Roy. See you again next week, everybody. See you, and it's been a pleasure. Take care. Terima kasih, kabungkap. Mabuhay. Thank you, everybody. See you.